Hello bookworms, it's Jade from Bedtime Bookworm and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm bringing you my August reading wrap-up. So I'm thinking today's video is going to be pretty quick. I only have 3 books to talk about because once again in August I had another reading slump. I went through something really difficult in my personal life again in August, something I'm not quite ready to talk about, but I'm sure I will talk about it in a future video. Luckily, I finished a couple of books early in August that were carryovers from July when I did quite a bit of reading. And then I had one more book that I'd kind of been reading slowly over a couple months that I was able to finish by the end of August. Well, I technically finished it in the first few days of September, but because I'd already been reading it for a couple months and I read most of it in August, I wanted to include it in my August wrap-up. Even though I didn't read a lot of things quantity-wise in August, quality-wise, it was pretty good. I had 2 4-star reads and 1 5-star read. Another thing that I like to look at in my wrap-ups is how many of the books that I read were part of a series, because I am sort of trying to read mostly books that are in series. I'm kind of failing at this, but I also don't really care at this point. But it's not a statistic that I'm ready to let go of. But none of the 3 books that I read in August were part of a series. These are the 3 books that I'm going to be talking about in today's video. I will have timestamps in the description box. If you're only interested in hearing my thoughts on some of these books, you can jump right to the ones that you're interested in. Okay, the very first book that I finished in the month of August was The Year of the Witching by Alexis Henderson, which I gave 4 out of 5 stars. I did receive a free e-advanced reader copy of this. I requested it off of the website NetGalley, so thank you to the publishers and to NetGalley for a free copy in exchange for an honest review. This is a YA horror slash fantasy slash horror. I originally thought this was being categorized primarily as fantasy, but I checked out the publisher's website and it looks like they have it categorized under gothic slash horror, so I'm gonna go with horror as being the primary genre for this, but it is also a fantasy. It takes place in a world that is not our own, and there are some magical elements as well. I very first heard about this book from the Social Distancing Book Fest, which was put on by my friend Bethany from Beautifully Bookish Bethany. I will try to link the specific panel that I heard the author speak on when she talked about this book, but if I can't figure out which one that was, I will at least link the playlist of all of the live streams from the book festival. So what caught my eye about this book was the author saying she was highly inspired by the Salem witch trials and that it was a fantasy. And the combination of those 2 things really sounded interesting to me. And I think this book has also been pitched as like Salem meets The Handmaid's Tale, which also sounds really interesting. There was definitely a lot of things that I liked about this book. The thing that I loved the most were the horror elements and the creepy aesthetic and atmosphere of the book. I think the cover for this book, one, is gorgeous, but also matches the tone and the aesthetic of the book so well. There's definitely a good amount of gore and blood described in this book, so I wouldn't recommend it for the faint of heart. And a lot of the imagery and the atmosphere reminded me of the horror movie Witch, if anybody has seen that and liked it, as well as a little bit of The Village, the M. Night Shyamalan movie, because it is set in a setting that feels like a historical setting in a religious community. It's a puritanical community, but also polygamist. I was actually pretty nervous going into this what I would think of the religion, because I have found that in fantasy books, if the religion is very similar to religion that we have in our world, like Christianity, sometimes it's hard for me to suspend my disbelief and really enjoy the story. But I didn't have that problem with this one because the magic, while it does have elements that I'm familiar with, there was also magic and witchcraft, and it's kind of got like a nature-y religion, nature-y magic thing going on that I really enjoyed. I did think the story got off to a slow start. It was kind of like a slow burn in the beginning as the groundwork for the story was being laid, but things definitely picked up in the second half of the book, pacing-wise. I do remember getting to the end of the story and thinking that I really liked the message that the book was trying to get across, and I wrote that down in my notes that I thought it had a really good message, but I have to admit that at this point, after all the things that I've gone through in August, and I finished this book in the first week of August. I don't quite remember what that message was, which is a little embarrassing to admit, but I'm gonna be honest with you. I think the message was along the lines of, standing up for what you believe in and against oppression even when the odds are against you, but I'm not really sure. This book does have some really dark things that it discusses though, some really heavy topics, and I want to give some content warnings for like violence, animal cruelty, pedophilia, not like on page, but it is mentioned, traumatic childbirth. There's definitely a childbirth scene that I thought was quite traumatic, even as someone who hasn't been through that. And also for religious abuse. Like I mentioned, the society in this book is like a very religious, puritanical, and also polygamist religion. I'm saying the word religion a lot. And so the religion is really strict in this world. I was actually pretty impressed with this as a debut book. I didn't think the writing or the plot was clunky or anything like that. I found the plot pretty compelling all the way until the end. But for some reason, I just didn't quite connect with the characters and the stakes of the story. Like I was interested, but I just didn't love it. But there was a lot of things that I enjoyed about this book, and I will definitely be interested in reading more of Alexis Henderson in the future. The next book that I finished in August, I also finished really early in the month, and that was The Last Time I Lied by Riley Sager. I had a hardcover copy of this out from my library as well as the audiobook out from my library, but I primarily listened to this on audio, which I really enjoyed. This was my third Riley Sager book, and I actually did this as a buddy read with my friend Rachel from The Shades of Orange. I will link her channel below. All three of the Riley Sager books that I've read, I've buddy read with her, and we really enjoy reading these together. Now I only have one Riley Sager book left that I haven't read. I haven't read Final Girls, but she's already read it, so I'm gonna have to read that one on my own. I was really looking forward to this one, especially during the summer, because this one is set at a summer camp, and you guys probably don't know this, but I grew up going to a summer camp every summer for, I don't know, 5, 6, maybe 7 years of my life. It was a really big part of my childhood. Summer wouldn't have felt like summer without the camp that I went to, and I made some really good friends there, and I have so many fond memories of summer camp. So I knew right off the bat that that was an element in my favor when it came to this book. Oh, which by the way, I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. I loved it so much, and I have given all 3 of the Riley Sagers that I've read 5 stars, so I think it's safe to say that he is one of my new favorite authors. So this one is about Emma, who when she was a young child, she went to a summer camp, and that summer the other 2 or 3 girls that were in her cabin all disappeared one night, and nobody knows what happened to those girls. So that's the past storyline, and there's a bunch of flashbacks to the past. And then the present time storyline is about Emma. She is an adult, she's an artist, and she gets invited back to summer camp. The camp had been completely closed since the summer when the girls went missing, and the owner of the camp decided to reopen and invited some of the old campers back as staff members. Emma decides to go back to camp thinking that she wants to investigate to see if she can find any clues and figure out what happened to her cabin mates that summer many, many years ago. Just like I expected, the summer camp element of the story was definitely a pro for me. I really enjoyed that aspect of it, and it gave me so many nostalgic feelings about when I used to go to summer camp. There were a few things that I thought were a little unrealistic based on my experiences at a summer camp, like the amount of freedom that the campers were given to just do their own thing and not tell adults where they were going, sort of thing. Like that would never really happen at a real summer camp because you're responsible for these kids, and there's, a lot of safety measures in place and things. So while there were a few things that kind of stood out to me as not being realistic, for the most part, I really enjoyed the setting. I just think that Riley Sager does a really great job with the mystery element. He's really good at revealing pieces of information at the right time to kind of keep you hooked and wanting to know what happened. There were so many little reveals and hints at things, and I had so many different theories about what was going to happen. That's something that Rachel and I have really enjoyed about reading Riley Sager books together, is that we're always like, oh, I think this is what's going to happen, or oh, I think this was a red herring. And we just have so many good conversations about what's going to happen, what we think is happening, what we think happened in the past, and we have never guessed it. Granted, I'm not the best at guessing plot twists and things like that, but I'm always really impressed with the final ending of the story and looking back at all the clues and thinking that it was a really good resolution to the story. The ending of this one especially, I think, is one of my favorites out of the Riley Sagers that I've read. I really liked the ending. And now I am even more excited to read Final Girls, the last Riley Sager I have to read until he comes out with another book, which hopefully will just be next year. Another thing that I always like to mention about Riley Sager is that I personally really enjoy the way he writes women. I think he writes really believable women characters who are also strong and smart, and I really appreciate the way he writes women characters, and I find them realistic. I know I've come across reviews of people saying that they don't think that and don't enjoy his women characters, but I always really enjoy them. If you guys like to read mystery thrillers, I definitely recommend Riley Sager's books. I think they are a lot of fun. Okay, and then the last book that I finished in August was one that, like I mentioned, I had been reading kind of slowly over the last couple of months. I did start it in July, but it was How Long Till Black Future Month by N.K. Jemisin. This is a short story collection, which is why it was kind of easy for me to pick away at it over a couple of months. I had a physical copy of this out from my library, but I also listened to an audiobook of it, which I got from my library as well. The audiobook was really cool because there are different narrators for each story. Well, I don't know if each individual story has different narrators, but there are multiple narrators throughout the whole book. There are a ton of stories in this collection. This was my first introduction to N.K. Jemisin. I'm not entirely sure if that was the best way to be introduced to N.K. Jemisin. I thought it could be a good way to get into her, and I don't think it was necessarily a bad way, but like a lot of short story collections are, there were a lot that I liked, and there were a lot that were major misses for me. There were so many that I gave 2 stars and just like totally didn't understand and didn't enjoy. But one thing I have to say about this collection is that it really shows the wide breadth of N.K. Jemisin's writing and writing style, and also how creative she is. She just comes up with such cool ideas for stories. A lot of times they didn't work for me, but sometimes I thought they were super interesting ideas and stories that I, when I finished, wanted more of and wished that those stories were full-length novels. A lot of her full-length novels actually have short stories in this collection, and what I mean by that are that these short stories are set in the same world, and I think some of them were like seed stories, like she wrote the short story first and then that eventually turned into her full-length novels. Okay, so I just went through and counted. Hopefully I counted correctly, but there were 7 short stories that I gave 2 stars. There were 8 short stories that I gave 3 stars. There were 5 short stories that I gave 4 stars, and 2 short stories that I gave 5 stars. So obviously it was a little bit bottom heavy, a lot less short stories that I gave 4 and 5 stars, but I think that's totally reasonable for a short story collection. And overall, I still think that the short story collection is worth reading, and that's why I settled on a 4-star rating for the book as a whole. I'm planning to update my Goodreads review with a list of all the short stories and what I rated them, but real quick, I am going to mention just the titles of the short stories that I gave 4 and 5 stars to. So the first short story that I gave 4 stars to was The Trojan Girl. I also gave 4 stars to Valedictorian and The Storyteller's Replacement, as well as Walking Awake, which was one that I remember I mentioned in my reading vlog because I really enjoyed that one and wish that it was like a full-length novel. And then I gave Cuisine des this is a French name, Cuisine des Memoirs, Cuisine des Memories. I gave that one 5 stars, which I think my cousin Shannon from That So Po, I'll link her channel below, told me was her favorite of the collection. I might be getting that wrong, but I also really enjoyed that one. And I also gave The Narcomancer 5 stars, which is the short story that eventually turns into or became maybe it's considered a prequel to the Dreamblood series duology. I think it's a duology, which the first book is called The Killing Moon, And I had originally planned to start with the 5th season for N.K. Jemisin, but after reading that short story, The Narcomancer, I'm super intrigued about the world of the Dreamblood duology, and I think maybe that's the next N.K. Jemisin I want to read because I love that story so much. And then the very last story in the collection, called Sinners, Saints, Dragons, and Haints in the City Beneath the Still Waters, I gave that one 4 stars. So those are all the 4 and 5-star short stories in this collection for me. And I guess I didn't really talk too much about why I didn't like some of the ones that I didn't like, but I think that had to do mostly with like the way the stories were told. So a lot of the stories, even the ones that I did end up liking, I feel like have a literary bent to them. The ones that I really didn't like often were really like abstract, nebulous kind of stories that I just like I didn't understand what was happening, and I'm just much more of a concrete reader. I need to know what is happening in the story. I'm not good at just like going with the flow and like enjoying a story even if I don't know what's happening. And just a lot of the stories in this collection were stories that were very abstract, and I spent like the whole story just confused and trying to understand what was happening, and then the story would be over before I even like figured anything out. And so those kinds of stories just in general really frustrate me. They're just not the kind of stories that I like to read. And there were quite a few of those in this collection, but there were also things that were a little more concrete. Oh, and I forgot to mention, I did this one as a buddy read with my friend Graf, and that was a lot of fun. It was really cool to bounce off our ideas about the stories against each other, and a lot of times we had similar feelings about stories, but a lot of times they were really different too, so it was always cool to hear a different perspective. If you guys have read the short story collection, definitely let me know in the comments section which of the short stories were your favorite if you happen to remember. Alright guys, those are the 3 books that I read in August. Hopefully this video was kind of short and sweet. I don't know. I can just jabber on about books all day, so we'll have to see what editing Jade is able to do. If you have read any of these books, let me know in the comment section what you thought of them, or let me know what your favorite book that you read in the month of August was. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more bookish content. That is all I have for now. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, bookworms, keep reading. Bye.